I'm Dr. Brad Hafford, and I study money. Never had much of it, so maybe that's why I'm so fascinated by it. I'm an archaeologist and an economic anthropologist, so I don't study how to make money, but rather how it functioned in ancient societies, and how and why it began. Last time, I seemed to show evidence in support of the market theory for the origin of money, but I cautioned that it was not the complete answer. First of all, we can't really find the origin of an abstract concept of money, so I was actually talking about the appearance of its physical correlate, currency. Early versions of currency are detectable in the archaeological record, and expanding trade might have caused them to emerge out of a more qualitative valuation. But currency can arise in different places for different reasons. Plus, before we can support any origin theory, we must examine it carefully. Here we have to look at what market means, and look at other origin theories as well. Like bank, market has many meanings. It signifies both a place and the activities that occurred in that place. But market activities don't have to occur in a physical market, and the term is also applied to an entire system of activities. In fact, the market today usually applies to the stock market, where we trade future possibilities. So market can be an abstract, where we trade in abstracts. It's easy to conflate meanings and make a statement something like, there were no physical markets in ancient Mesopotamia, therefore, there was no market economy. That statement, which formed part of the formalist substantivist debate in ancient economics, is flawed for many reasons. Prompting the debate in the 1950s was Karl Polanyi, an economic anthropologist at Columbia University and the founder of the substantivist school of thought. Although I'm oversimplifying his argument, it was at least partly based on the idea that physical markets are the direct representation of market economy. But even if that were true, what exactly does a physical market look like, and how do we find it archaeologically? Many people identify markets as largely open areas in which stalls are placed for selling goods directly to consumers. Now, this is a rather Western conception, founded in the Greek agora, the Roman forum, and medieval markets in general. Such open market spaces are generally not found in the ancient Near East. Markets in modern Arabic countries tend to be more densely packed, narrow streets, with shops that look much like houses. This form of street market, known as a souk or a bazaar, may well have existed in the ancient Near East as well. And there are excavated examples of ancient street areas that are believed to have been at least partly dedicated to trade. Polanyi's primary argument, however, was that we cannot look at ancient economies in the same way that we look at modern economies. We have a kind of bias of the present, where it's difficult to separate ourselves from things that are so ingrained in our minds today as to seem virtually unquestionable. These things include maximization, supply and demand, and money. In this, Polanyi was right. It is best to see ancient economic behavior through the eyes of the ancients. It's almost impossible to do, but it is important to recognize our own biases, which are typically founded in neoclassical economics. This formal economic view of the world is exemplified by John Maynard Keynes from the 1930s, but it has its roots stretching all the way back to Aristotle, Adam Smith, and John Stuart Mill. A physical market is somewhat difficult to define, but it's easier to identify than abstract market, just as currency is easier to identify than abstract money. But the lack of one does not necessarily mean the lack of the other. Trade in some form has existed since humans began communicating with one another, and trade in and between small groups can be seen as a very basic form of abstract market. As trade becomes more complicated, it can be made easier with an exchangeable form of money, and so expanding trade can lead to the development of currency. But a concrete form of money also assists administration, particularly in the collection of taxes. This leads to another theory of the origin of money, the state theory. As communities grew larger and more complex, their organizing bodies found it increasingly difficult to assess collective value and redistribute it for the collective good. Thus, they may have mandated a physical form of money. It is possible that the state theory explains the origin of coinage, but certainly not of money in general. Money as abstract exchange value goes back much farther than state-level societies. Currency seems to appear at about the same time as kingship and the state are forming in Mesopotamia, but so does writing. Writing from the people of the time is fundamental in identifying abstract concepts of that time. A causal link is difficult to establish then. Did state mandate writing and currency out of its need, or did state arise out of the benefits of these things having already been created? Taxation or payment to temples in early state society in Mesopotamia was quite often conducted in kind, as a portion of crops, for example. Tax levies in the form of coin, especially to pay for armies as a state expands, have often occurred. Some such levies appear early in the history of coinage, around 600 BCE, leading to the partial validity of the state theory for coin. In fact, the Persians may have adopted coins in order to pay Greek mercenaries to fight their wars. Governments do benefit from a physical form of currency, and they are typically the ones issuing coinage. Part of the definition of coin is that it carries an identifying mark of the authorizing entity. So, the fact that currency stamped with state guarantees was a product of the states issuing them should come as no surprise. It is still possible that currency was mandated by earlier state-level societies for purposes of taxation. Most early complex societies appear to have been redistributive in nature. That is, the growing numbers of people living in proximity cooperated to ensure survival of the group by combining their surplus production and distributing it more or less evenly across the entire group. This is essentially the process of taxation. I grow my crops and put my surplus into a collective bank, a granary, or a treasury. We as a society then use that surplus to benefit all of us by redistributing food in months when growing is not possible. But who gathers and redistributes that food? A subgroup develops who manages this task, and that subgroup, essentially, is the developing administration or government. Larger societies require more administrators and perhaps a hierarchy among them. They begin to use the surplus food to support workers, to build canals, roads, bigger granaries, and other infrastructure that allows the collective society to create even bigger surpluses. This is the economic organization of a society, and in theory, it goes on forever, though in reality, only until something causes a collapse of the system. The word economy derives from the Greek noun oikos, meaning house, and the verb nemein, meaning to manage or organize. Economic thinking, the concept of provisioning a group over the long term, came into being long before the Greeks and even long before state-level societies. It is supported by the concept of counting and measuring. So we must know how much of a resource is available and how much we are using at any given time. We don't know when humans first began to count, but it certainly precedes writing. Standardized measurement may be developing around the same time as writing, as we find measurement systems in the earliest texts. Each system recorded different things and had its own numerical ordering or base calculations. We still don't completely understand the maths being used in these early texts, but great strides have been made recently. Length and volume are clearly represented with their own systems, and another may record weight. It would appear that weight, though, is the last of the measures that is solidified, and many scholars believe it is tied in with the trade in metals in the early 3rd millennium BCE. This may be true, but I believe it extends into the 4th millennium, and copper was already circulating at that period. But let's get back to origin theories of money. Most deal only with physical currency, typically coin, later in human history. But there is a theory that tries to demonstrate a very early impetus to quantify valuation that may explain a need for defined exchange value, and that could have led to a more specific currency. It goes by the name of bride price and blood money. Somewhat unfortunate terms, these refer to the need for early groups to expand their gene pool and their tendency to fight amongst one another. The people of the Paleolithic lived in small, mostly mobile groups, with little or no hierarchy. There may have been some minor division of labor and perhaps a few people who displayed more leadership than others, but most activities were conducted by most members of the group equally. We don't know how often raids, skirmishes, or meetings occurred between these early groups. Regardless, in order to survive, any group needs food, and it must procreate. Contact with other groups had to occur, and this led to three options: run, fight, or communicate. These options could lead to isolation, death, or trade. Meetings for the purpose of trade or festival may have been regular episodes, and these meetings could involve pairing of people from one group with those of another. Meetings with hostile groups that resulted in loss of members through death may also have been common. Even raids on one group for the purpose of seizing or killing members may have happened. Morally, we do not put prices on human lives, but members of each group can be seen as a kind of resource. Each member provides utility to the group. To lose a member, either to death or to marriage, into another group, decreases the group's ability to gather other resources, primarily food. Therefore, compensation may be necessary to maintain peace. This is the core of the bride price blood money theory. A drawn-out feud between neighboring groups could lead to disaster for one or both groups, and that may become quite clear after the loss of one or more members. In order to restore peace, an offering of some sort may be made and accepted. This is the meaning here of blood money. It's unlikely that there was a specified number of animals, skins, berries, tubers, weapons, etc. needed to pay for a death. But the act of negotiating a peace through offerings can be seen as a kind of exchange at price. Similarly, when a member of one group goes willingly to another group as a mate, a spousal dowry may be required. This, too, is a kind of price. Whether we can call this currency is highly debatable, but the act of exchange in the distant past occurred not just in resources or products, but also essentially in people. It is quite distasteful to think of paying for a spouse or of paying for the loss of a human life, but some societies still have the concept of bride price or dowry, and fines and imprisonment are most often meted out for unlawful death even today. Exchange and negotiation are attempts at quantifying value, and this is at the heart of money. It makes clear the problem with defining money, however, and why so many theories deal specifically with physical forms. These are things, and as such, we have a chance, though relatively slim, of actually determining their origins. The origin of exchange and valuation, however, are shrouded in the mists of the very distant past. I'm Dr. Brad Hafford. Join me again for another money lecture, and be sure to check out NoteNook, my series on modern paper currency.